Welcome to the Ultimate Men's Movement. I'm Dr. Jack Rocco, your host, sponsored by the Ultimate Men's Clinic. We have an interesting guest today. From my standpoint, it's very interesting because this guest was my gifted teacher, and I'm going back to I think 1975, if I'm not correct. Is that right?
Somewhere around there.
Yeah, I was in the 5th grade when we first met. You were known as Miss Caputo, but now this is Yvonne Caputo, the 2-book author of her first book was entitled Flying with Dad, which was a memoir written through her father of his story in World War II. And I'll let you tell more. I'll just give you a brief intro. And then the second book was Dying with Dad, where you went into the process of saying goodbye and being prepared in advance and advance directives. So welcome, Yvonne Caputo, to the Ultimate Men's Movement. And I'll let you introduce yourself and kind of highlight yourself how you'd like to.
Okay. Well, very fondly, as a former teacher, loved that work, met and married this guy, and moved to southeastern Pennsylvania and couldn't find a teaching position. So luckily, one of the trips that you and I took to England was the impetus for me to go back and get a second master's degree in clinical psych. And that was because kids started falling apart on me when we were in England, and I really felt inept to help. So that master's degree gave me an opportunity to work in employee assistance. So that meant I was doing counseling and training. And then along the way, a CEO from a retirement community got me on the phone and said, "Would you consider being our HR director?" And because I had worked in employee assistance, I was seeing things from the outside in terms of how businesses could be better, particularly from supervision. And I thought, well, here's an opportunity to work from the inside. Can I help to make this place the kind of place that I would want to work in? Yeah. So that's my checkered past.
Yeah. Now, how did you get into what was the impetus for you writing a book? That's a huge endeavor. And I also want to thank you because you introduced me to Ingenium Books, our publisher, which we both publish our books through. But what was the impetus for writing the book? How did it start? And because I think that's, we're a men's clinic. And what I really wanted to try and highlight today, to give you a little preview, as a men's clinic, we deal mostly with men's issues, and we, do a variety of things here on the podcast. But I wanted to get into the whole, the role of the father and, the admiration you had for your father as, a young girl and how that changed over the years. But also like how things have changed in the common world. It seems like men, you hear more about, toxic men than you hear about good men anymore. And, in my lifetime, it seems like that pendulum has swung completely from, I thought it was a, paternal society, a male dominated society, to now, I'm not sure what it is. It seems like the roots and the timbers of the building seem to be shaking in a lot of ways. So, how'd you get into the book? Start with that.
Well, I can honestly say that during my lifetime, I thought, maybe I had something to write about. But in 2008, dark January night, I'm on the phone with my father. And my father is a brittle diabetic. So we talk a lot about health issues. But once we talked about health issues, and I'm not a sports fan, so I can't tell you what the Steelers did, he opened up and told me this quirky, funny, off-the-wall story about making an emergency landing in freed Belgium. And I said to him, "Dad, let me get a pencil and paper. I want to take notes." His exact words, Jack, "What the hell do you want to do that for?" And I said, "This is good. This might be something that the family would really like to have." So that being said, the very next phone call, I don't know where it came from, but it was just the first thing out of my mouth. "Dad, if you're willing, start at the beginning." And story after story started rolling off his tongue. And about maybe 4 or 5, what I would consider chapters in, I thought, I think I've got a book. The stories were so good. And this was an individual GI. He wasn't Eisenhower. It wasn't the Battle of the Bulge. It wasn't D-Day. It wasn't any of those kinds of things. It was just his story. And we just continued. We just continued with the stories. And that's how the book came to be.
Mhm.
But
Yeah,
I learned a lot about Dad in that process.
right. Like you said, how do you feel that changed? I'm sure that changed your relationship with him, made you look at the early years differently. Can you go into that a little bit? Like what depth and color did that bring to him and your relationship?
Well, it really relates to what you said in the beginning about the shift that we're seeing for men and what's being asked of men. Dad was greatest generation. Food on the table, roof over our head, Sunday morning, left pew, mass. I mean, and he was always there. But he and I didn't have what I would call a close relationship. He was much easier with my brothers. They could go fishing, they could go hunting, they could do all those kinds of things, but I don't think honestly he knew what to do with these girls.
Now, how many were there? What was your family dynamics?
There were 4 of us.
Okay.
My older brother Michael, myself, my sister Connie, and my brother Mark. So what happened in the writing of the book is I got to know this man who was my father in a really deep and personal way. And his willingness to share with me opened up this man so that I finally understood what it was in terms of what caused that distance. He didn't know how.
Yeah.
I was asking something of him that was not a part of his history. It was not a part of his skill set. But interestingly enough, the more I listened, the more I asked questions, the more he began to trust me and to let me in to the soft side of him.
Yeah.
And I think he found himself very comfortable sharing his soul. And that was the ticket, because that was the piece of my father that I always wanted. And from his perspective, rather, I think what he got from me was that I was safe.
Yeah, a lot of those guys, that generation, but those soldiers in particular, um, they didn't want to talk about anything. Um, Everything was kept in the family. Now someone, you have a hamburger for lunch, you got to share it with the whole world on Facebook, you know, whereas you didn't want to share family secrets with the world or personal secrets, things you did, especially you grew up Catholic as well as I did. Um, you know, God cries, everything's a sin. I'm sure, when you're in war, you do stuff that is not glorious. And you carry that with you, and nowadays people are more open about it, with PTSD and whatnot. But back in that generation, you didn't want to speak the words, right?
Well, interestingly enough, maybe about 3/4 of the way into the book, he told me about a recurring nightmare that he had when he came home from the war. And it was the same thing all the time. His B-24 was going down. To get out, he had to crawl through this passage. And the passage was lined with stainless steel, and he couldn't get purchase. And my mother would finally wake up because he was screaming. And she would say to him, "Okay, Mike, what is it?" And he said, "No, no, no, it's nothing. I'm all right." Jack, he'd done channels in the mattress. They had to throw away the mattress. So he's finally telling me about this nightmare.
Did that actually happen? Did his plane actually go down or
No,
no? It was just,
No, it was just him watching planes go down.
yeah.
And the B-24 that he was flying was considered the flying coffin.
They used to call it, is that the one they used to call it? It was like a front porch, like it was like flying a house with the front porch as the cockpit. They talked about, I'm not sure it was the B-24, but they talked about that in Unbroken, that Louis Zamperini story.
Actually, he flew a B-24.
Yeah, I think
He flew a B-24.
that one was notorious for going down.
Yeah. The way that the plane was created, there was a wing. It's called the Davis wing. And it sits higher. And in the wing is the bladder. And in the bladder is the fuel. So jet pilots, Germans, would come and they would hit that wing, and it was curtains. It was curtains. Or flak would hit that wing, and it was curtains. So I said to my father, because sarcasm was a really unique language in our family.
Oh.
I said, well, you know, Dad. I said, no, Dad, your nightmare was normal. What the hell do you mean? And so I'm a psychotherapist. I love neurobiology. I love psychobiology. I love it all. So I'm explaining to him. I'm explaining to him how the brain works. Fight, flight, freeze, or play dead. And I could literally, Jack, hear his shoulders drop when I was able to explain why he had those nightmares, what they were all about. So when I finished that, I said, Dad, what was it like when you came back from the war? And he said, well, my father worked in a men's clothing store. He knew everybody. He absolutely knew everybody in our little town. He said there were other GIs walking around and they seemed fine.
Right.
And they didn't say anything was wrong. He said, so I thought there was something wrong with me. And then the other thing, another one came out. He had a flashback. He went to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And he went right to the World War II Museum. And parked there was a B-24. So he's walking down the fuselage, goes around the end of the tail. Parked right next side is a Messerschmitt. It's a German jet. Boom. Dad loses consciousness. He's on the ground.
Wow.
When he finally comes to, his friend said to him, well, what happened, Mike? And Dad said, I don't know. Dad thought it was something at that point because of the dialysis and stuff. He thought it was something physical. So I said, that's a flashback, Dad. And then I went into the neurobiology of what a flashback is all about. So I said, your brain remembered. It may not have remembered in the very same way.
Subconsciously.
Yes.
Which is, by definition, below your understanding, below your recognition of it.
Your hippocampus fired and your amygdala went right along with it. And did you fight, flight, flee, freeze, or play dead? Play dead.
Yeah.
And so that piece of it brought, I think, even more closeness. Here was his daughter who was helping him to reprocess things that happened a long time ago, to make him feel like he was okay.
Yeah.
So the tightness that came between Dad and I think is really, it speaks to the advance directive. All right, so I'm working in a retirement community, and we had a case where the advance directive was written in another state, and our state didn't honor what the other one did, and there was brouhaha, and it went to court, and this poor resident got 2 surrogates, one to allow treatment, and then the second one could be her daughter if the treatment didn't work. I was really like, holy mackerel, does Dad have one of these? So I called him, and he said, no, I've never heard of that before. And then when I explained what an advance directive is, that it would allow someone to speak for him if he couldn't speak for himself. So he and I set up that appointment, and we went, and he made me his healthcare agent. So.
And then that was, I'm assuming that led into the the second book, right? Dying with Dad.
Sorry, I don't understand.
Now, was there a specific rationale or thought process of that, or just something that you could utilize your work in the nursing home along with your father's story? Was there how did those pieces kind of fit together into that?
Ingenium Books.
Yeah, there we go.
All right. Our publisher. So Bonnie Wagner Stafford, after Flying with Dad was published, she said, Yvonne, I think you've got 3 more books in you. What are they? Well, I thought about it, and yeah, there were a couple, and I mentioned them to her, and she said, what about a book about the 5 wishes? Now, for your audience, the 5 wishes is another kind of advanced directive. So Dad had 2. He had an attorney-drawn one, and he had the 5 wishes. The 5 wishes is an advanced directive on heart. It asks questions like, how do you want to be remembered? What do you want your children to know? How comfortable do you want to be? What kind of funeral do you have? Do you want to be cremated or do you want to be buried? So when this document came in front of me when I was working in the retirement community, I recognized these were asking questions. I had no idea what Dad's answer would be. So I'm in the car and the document's on the passenger seat and I'm fretting the whole 6.5 hours that it takes to drive to my dad's house because he could be explosive. That was the other part of Dad. He was angry at the drop of a hat. And I thought, how am I going to bring this up? What's he going to say? You know, is he going to yell loud enough that I want to leave the room? And it was just the perfect atmosphere when I walked into his hospital room. He said, yeah, let's do it. So he puts his feet over the edge of the bed and gives me a place to sit down and he pats it. And I can remember the warmth, Jack, that I was sitting in the spot where my dad was. We went through this document. So now I had everything. I had everything that I needed that when the time came, I could act on his behalf. He trusted me with that information. That was his gift. So in 2009, he was back in the hospital again. He always got into the hospital at Christmas time, because none of the family was around, and he was a character, and nurses and doctors doted on him. They absolutely loved him. So he's in the hospital again, and we go back to see him. And he was just so different that time. And then we drove all the way back home, and about an hour after we got back in the house, he called, and he was livid. I held the phone out here. He was yelling so loud. They released him from the hospital with no pain meds.
Oh, yeah. I've been going through that. It's funny how when you talk about your father, even your impression of him is very similar to, sounds like my father. You know, I mean, they're a little different generations. Obviously, my father was more early Vietnam era, but that's how men were, you know, and you know the anger, and I mean, we talk about it now that you know men historically and even still, you know, you have two emotions. You know, you can either be fine or angry. You know, there's no in between. You know, it just times have changed so dramatically. And, you know, just like I said, the relationship between children and their parents, you know, now your parents are your best friends. You know, I don't know when that started because, you know, it took me forever to even, you know, look at my father as possibly a friend. He was my father. He was the disciplinarian. Um, you know, and I'm sure it was the same or even worse with your father, you know, that generation.
Um, for me, okay, and again, as a psychotherapist, I finally understood the anger.
Mm-hmm.
The anger was from all this stuff that was bottled up inside him that he didn't know was normal. He didn't know that his feelings were normal. He didn't know that talking about things was okay. He didn't know a lot. So this bottled stuff was always right at the edge. So I got back in the car and I drove across the state, and I was home no more than 2.5 hours, and Dad was gone. And on that phone call, once he got the
That wasn't expected at that time.
No, not at all.
Oh.
So on the phone, all at the end of our conversation, the expletive deleteds were all out. And he said to me something he'd never said before. He said, "Yvonne, I'm so sorry I yelled at you. I didn't mean it." And I went, "Dad, you were just venting," which is what he was doing. So I get home, and the neighbors and I found him in his bedroom, non-responsive. Called the EMTs because I'm not a nurse. I don't know what's going on. And my father's dying wish was feet first out of his own home. So that means gone and on a gurney. And because I had these 2 documents, I went to work. I was on automatic pilot. Dad does not want to go to the hospital. He wants to die here. So I told the EMTs that he had this document, and they said it was too old. I no longer believe that. So I finally called the hospital, and I said, "You've got a DNR on his chart. Get it over to the emergency room. They're bringing him in." God bless the emergency room doctor, because he called the EMTs and said, "You can stop."
Yeah.
So Dad was out at the end of the bed. I laid down beside him, put my arm across his chest, told him that I loved him, told him he was going to go home to see Mom, and then did the glue, which was the Lord's Prayer. And he was gone. That happened because of the relationship that Dad and I built.
Mm-hmm.
That happened. So for your audience, my grief journey around Dad is so different. Do I miss him? Absolutely. Would I like to cook one more pot roast dinner for him? Absolutely. Are there things that I still want to know and I want to pick up the phone and say, "Hey, Dad"? Absolutely. But I experience a profound sacred joy when I think about Dad's last minutes, because he trusted me with letting him go.
That the knots were, all the strings were tied up before he went, and you accomplished his wishes. I always say that about, when my grandparents died. I thought my grandfather's death, if death could be beautiful, I mean, it was. And he lived with the family, he died with the family. Like literally, people came in from everywhere. And, he had been, I joked that he'd been dying for 20 or 30 years. The Italian drama, I remember being in my freshman year of college, and I had to miss an organic chemistry test because Papa was dying, and that meant basically that, he was having a coronary catheterization, when I got there. But everything was drama. So he'd been dying. And eventually he's 93 and he was sick. He was in the hospital again. And we had a family reunion like the week or two before. And literally in the hospital, the Roccos were everywhere surrounding, and he was struggling. And we took my grandmother down Graham, you've been sitting here all day. Let's go get something to eat. And so we took her down and we talked about some memories. And then we came up, and within 10 minutes, he took his last breath. Just surrounded by family. His wife was with him, but she was good. She told, it was beautiful. He said in so many ways, but her death, unfortunately, just lingered and lingered and lingered. And she had pulmonary edema and was basically, drowning in her own fluids. And it was just a horrible death. And, it's just his death, I feel so wonderful about, but the way she went, it just leaves that, regret or unfinished business, on your plate. So having at least some preparation in advance of that, death is going to happen for all of us, unfortunately, but it's in preparation. How do you want to go? And that's a big point. So that's, your second book goes into the step-by-step process of what's important, what the 5 questions are, and how to go about answering them.
That 5 Wishes document, and for your audience, 5wishes.org is $5. $5. You get this blue pamphlet, and under sections, they ask specific questions. And if the answer is okay, you let it go. If an answer you don't like, you cross it out. So here's my dad. Hey, Dad, do you want to donate your organs when you die? And he said, hell no. He said, they can't be of any use to anybody. They've got to be rotten to the core. So I crossed that one out. We went through question after question after question. And when he passed, my sister and brother and I were with the priest. And my brother said, gee, I don't know how this works. I don't know what we're supposed to do. And I said, Michael, this is what Dad wants. Dad wants a high mass. He wants children or grandchildren to do the readings. He didn't care what the readings were, as long as the readings were personal to the person reading. He would like his nephews and grandsons to be the pallbearers. And I'm just doing this litany because this is what Dad told me.
That's great. Yeah, so it goes into that much detail.
It goes into that much detail.
It's a step-by-step. It's something anyone, 5wishes.org, right?
Yep.
And you can get all that information, but also how to prepare for the questions, what questions to ask, what questions to document, how to get it notarized or signed by an attorney so that it's official, right? So, I mean,
well, the 5 wishes, in the state of Pennsylvania, 2 witnesses makes it legal.
Okay, so none of these things need to be...
Right. In some other states, it does need to be notarized.
Even with the advance directive?
The advance directive in the state of Pennsylvania was legal with just my signature and Dad's signature.
Okay.
But I do know that in other states, there is notarization that's required.
And do you know if there's been any, I guess that's been sufficient legally. There's no cases out there where that's been questioned or the legitimacy of a signature has been questioned. So that's legit. That's
legit. Now, that speaks to one of the things that's critical, and that's knowing what your state requires. Because here, that case that we had in the nursing home, the state that it was written in honored quality of life as a reason to say no.
Mm-hmm.
Pennsylvania didn't. And so we were caught in this bind of having a document that was good, let's say maybe in New York, I don't know, but it wasn't good. So it had to go to court. And I didn't want any of that stuff to happen. Now, for your audience, the reactions to people reading Dying with Dad are awesome. One of them was a young lady. She's in her 40s. Her parents keep coming to her and saying, we want to talk about this. We want to get this. We want you to have all the stuff that you need. No, let's not do that. I don't want to do that. When she read the book, she understood that was something she needed to do, whether she wanted to or not.
Yeah, because that's not something people like to talk about. It's not something people are ever really instructed on. So I think that's a huge value of your book. That I'm sure you're in a very small niche of how many books address that, but it's I think you made it nice because especially with the prequel, if you will, of Flying with Dad, like going over his life and getting to know him and building that relationship, and then transitioning that book into keeping the theme of Dad, but now here's my experience with this guy that I just introduced you to. Now I'm going to tell you how we say goodbye. And I think the poetry of those 2 books together is really nice.
Well, that's what my publisher saw.
Yeah.
She saw that as being, just an outgrowth of the first book. The second one was an 85-year-old man, and we talked on the phone after he read Flying with Dad. And we talked about the 5 wishes, and he said, well, I didn't know I needed to do something like that.
Mhm.
So he got the document, he filled it out, all that kind of stuff. On his birthday, or before his birthday, he says to his daughters, here's what I want. I want us to Zoom, and I want to go over my 5 wishes with you.
That's beautiful.
All right.
Yeah.
So they get to the point of, he's dead. What comes next? He wanted to be cremated. So the question from his daughters was, what do you want us to do with your ashes? And he says, I don't care. Throw them over a bridge. At that point, at that point, what does it matter? So they said, well, wouldn't you like us to scatter your ashes out on the farm where you grew up? Well, that's too much trouble. They said, no, Dad, maybe that would be something that would make us feel good. He changed that part of the 5 wishes to grant them that last piece. The best one was one of the women in our writers group was acutely ill. And she did the 5 wishes. And then we found out that she was on hospice, that she was choosing hospice. She's in her 50s.
Wow.
Yeah, in her 50s.
Like breast cancer or something?
No,
Mm.
a colonoscopy gone wrong.
Wow.
Uh-huh. So her husband said that she wanted to talk to us. I had 8 minutes with her on a Zoom call. She kept saying, I love the 5 wishes. I did the 5 wishes. My family agrees. They know exactly what I want. I'm at peace. I'm ready, and they're ready. Wow. I mean, to know that a book can do that kind of thing.
Yeah. No, that's beautiful. And with my own book, same thing. When you get someone who out of the blue calls you and tells you a story of how it impacted. Several months ago, I had an orthopedic surgeon contact me on LinkedIn, and he goes, Jack, I don't know if you remember me, but I was a medical student, I think, when you were a senior resident, and I remember rotating with ortho and blah, blah, blah. He goes, I saw you wrote a book about adoption. He goes, I was adopted as well. So, I sent him the book, or he got it on Audible or something. And, he messaged me back. He's like, that was like reading an autobiography of myself. He said that my story mimicked his story. And he goes, there's always been things I've wondered about with adoption. There's always things that, concern me that I was, I had issues with, but the way you talk about it, it just like confirmed, that, like you said with your father, that, hey, I'm normal. This is normal. This is not, but unless you hear someone else say your same words back to you in a different way, it never really clicks with you. A counselor or a therapist might be able to say, oh, that's normal. That's normal. It's like, he's just telling me that because it's his job to tell you that,
Right.
But like I said, when you hear someone else's words, especially in print, when you hear your feelings and thoughts and you read those from someone else's writing, I think that's hugely powerful.
It is.
We do kind of short interviews here. We don't do long, hour-long interviews. But what would kind of the bottom line about your father, your relationship, having gone through all this, having had the maybe not warm and cozy childhood with him, but maturing into older age, and then finally being the one. If you weren't the chosen child, younger, you kind of ended up being the one who put him to rest in a very dignified manner. And I think that's wonderful. So how would you summarize that? Give anyone advice on father-daughter relationships? I think that's something that our audience would be, interested in, like, the role of father-daughter relationships in a father's life and vice versa.
We grow too soon old and too late smart. um, when I was in my 30s, and this is a story that's in Flying with Dad, Dad and I had this huge argument over Thanksgiving dinner, and an Italian Thanksgiving dinner at that, with 7 courses, and you're there eating for hours.
I've been in those arguments.
Okay. So I got up and walked away because I just remember if I say what I'm thinking, it'll be hurtful and I'll never be able to take it back. So I'm walking around my cousin's house. I finally get back and mom's waiting up for me. Everybody else has gone to bed. And she said, her face was so set with sorrow and sternness. She said, your father's not going to come to you. If you want to get to know your father, you're going to have to go to him. So 30 years later, he tells this story and I start to listen. Now, I probably could have listened a long time ago, but that's one thing, is that finding those opportunities or listening for little kernels and just saying to a parent or to a friend or to a mate, tell me more about that.
Mhm.
You know,
But I think when you're younger, these things, they blow through your ears. You don't know they're important. Unfortunately, it does take wisdom. It does take life's experiences. It takes some scratches on the car, and dents to really understand that, dents happen in life and scratches happen. Whereas when you're young, it's so idealistic and, it should be this way, should be that way. So, especially father daughter, I mean, I think I have, I think I have a great relationship with my daughter, but it's different from my son. My son, I can just get him in a headlock and jab him a couple times in the ribs, and he knows I love him. My daughter, I've got to be a little different with her, So, that those relationships have become very interesting to me in later life, and now that I have my own children, so somebody that I'm sure my parents told me things 1,000 times I wasn't prepared to hear.
so the beauty of flying with Dad was I did a book talk and everybody had read the book. And there were these 3 young people in the audience, all girls. Former teacher, I'm going to call on them. They've been silent through the whole thing. The third one said, I don't have a close relationship with my father, but what your book did, I'm spending more time with him. I want to get to know.
Mhm.
So again, being an author and hearing something like that from one of your readers is priceless. So that's one thing that I would want readers to have. And then, of course, the second thing is you got to talk about death and dying. It's hard. It's ugly. It's nasty. But my children have my 5 wishes. They know what I want. We talk about it. For instance, my stepdaughter said, well, if you can't take care of yourself, I expect to take care of you. But I live in California and you live in Pennsylvania. What then?
Makes it easy on them too.
I said,
Yeah.
if I can no longer take care of myself, you take me to California.
There you go.
So that's just the way I feel about it, is letting them know what I want. So in the eventuality, and the eventuality is going to come, that they know. And my best friend calls me and she was doing the 5 wishes and she said, well, there's this question and I'm not sure what the family would want or how I should do this. And she went on like that for a couple of them. I said, Mary, the 5 wishes isn't about what they want. It's about what you want.
Yeah.
So being able to do that and to do it in advance.
And once again, that generation didn't have much choice in many things. So to have the choice on how they die is probably a nice, weight off their shoulders, I'm sure.
Well, I know that morphine doesn't kill people, but it could make the time shorter. But what I said to the kids is, I don't care. I don't want to be in pain.
Right.
So those kinds of things. So that's the second book.
Great. Well, Yvonne, I can't tell you how much joy this has been to interview you. 50 years. If 1975 was when we met, 50 years later, I'm interviewing my teacher about her books. What a wonderful thing. So I really appreciate the relationship that we've had over the years. And reconnecting and all the things you did for us when I was your student, for you to take 30, 20, how many kids did you take to England?
That last trip was 37 kids.
Yeah.
I think it was 17 and then 18 and the last.
I don't know that still happens anymore. Maybe in some schools, but I think and we were a public school, for us to go through and have, a school trip to England for 2 weeks. I mean, what a responsibility you took on that. But, so I thank you for that. And it's really impacted, you've influenced my whole life. So I appreciate it.
Well, I will tell Alan and Heather that you said hello because we Zoom with them maybe once a month or once every 6 weeks.
Yeah. I'll send you this when it comes out so you can, they can all watch. We'll be international in England.
Well, this has been fun. I really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
We'll keep in touch and let me know how everything's going.
Okay, I will.
Thank you. This has been a simulcast of the Ultimate Men's Movement, sponsored by the Ultimate Men's Clinic. Thank you for joining.